long-time friend of like the test atelier and a whole bunch of us. And it's amazing to have him in Leeds again because we bloody love him. So yeah, please welcome Chris Chant to the stage.
Excuse me, so a word of warning, I went to football last night and had a big old shout, so my voice is a little bit knackered. Well, that's where we're at. So my eyesight's also bad, so if I keep doing this, it's because I can't read. So who am I and why should you give a shit? Well, I'm Chris Chant, head of quality at a company called Cutover. So Cutover is an orchestration platform. We sort of specialise in collaborative automation, as we call it. So generally like IT, disaster recovery, release orchestration, data migrations, fun stuff. So yeah, head of quality at Cutover. I also run a company making board games and selling nerdy Warhammer type stuff. So that's the thing. Coach and mentor in various guises, so in software, in coaching on the under 10s football team. Started training as a therapist a few years ago. Became a dad. It's quite easy. There's also a book, The Lives of Christopher Chant. I've never read it, but if you've seen Howl's Moving Castle, it's by the same author. So this is a default slide, and I like it. So I thought this is what we're gonna cover, and I wanted 3 things, and I just thought, I can't find album covers that would cover what I wanted to talk about, so I just left it as it is. So there we are. So we're going to look at some of the problems and barriers we see to understanding value, okay? And then I want to look at things we need to consider to understand it better, and then some workshops and kind of experiments you can run to gain a better understanding. So where did this talk come from? Well, this quote gets thrown around a lot. If you've not seen it, I guess I'm surprised, but quality is value to someone. So Gerald M. Weinberg, it's been expanded upon by some individuals. They say someone that matters, and there's other manglings of it, but that's the general consensus, that quality is value to someone. And I think it's probably fair to say the room's probably full of testers, maybe some developers, but quality is our sort of game, right? That's what we work in. So understanding what quality is kind of important. But the word value here kind of started to piss me off a bit because it's mentioned all over the place. So Agile Manifesto, one of the 12 principles is delivering valuable software. What does that even mean? Scrum is all about delivering value in increments. And then SAFe kind of wraps up as solutions. So it talks about solutions. And all the words, pages, roles, activities, and artifacts in SAFe exist for only one purpose: to help Agile teams continuously deliver solutions that provide value to their customers. That's kind of how I feel about SAFe. It's one of my favourite photos, that. During my research, I came across this absolute beauty. See if this works. It kind of does. There you go. Click, boom, amazing. SAFe, baby. Love it. So that's the SAFe website. It's a horrible mess. So reading all these sort of statements, seeing the word value everywhere, I wanted to know what value is. And I started to look at various resources. Essentially, my research goes into opening a book, looking at the index, looking for the word value and seeing what it says, because I'm just interested in what people make of the word and what it means to other industries. So onto the observation type stuff. So some of the problems I've seen in my career to date Some of these will probably feel familiar because you've probably seen this. So one of the big problems I see is agile development teams. Now, we all work in them, I'm assuming, and generally considered to be a good thing. But one thing businesses are really good at is keeping people busy. Not necessarily doing anything of value, just being really, really busy. So we can sort of turn into a feature factory. So, and this sort of stems from manufacturing and Taylorism from like the 1900s. So it's like not really changed. There's this sort of habit of, well, we've got people, we're paying them money, so we better make sure they're busy doing something, right? Whereas it actually turns out that that's not actually very effective, and you should be focusing on actually getting stuff done than trying to keep everyone busy. An interesting thing about that is I sort of observed recently, or more often now, is that there's a lot of, particularly developers that I've come across, that just want to do their work and they want to pick up the next ticket. And there's not this sort of team onus on, let's get this out the door and work together on it. That's just some developers. Anyway, bit of a tangent. So the way our organisations are organised, we have this sort of, we're an agile team, an agile software house, and that's the only agile bit of your company, often. So you can optimise to deliver stuff fast and often. But if your organisation is not agile, then often you're working on projects that were planned, it could be 6 months ago, it could be a year ago. Large organisations are particularly guilty of this. They'll set out to plan the next 6 months or year, and it's all broken into projects. And by the time it comes around to actually doing the project, it might not even be worth doing it anymore. I've worked on a project recently that we were replacing a monolith for a product we knew had a shelf life. It was a dying industry, and the company decided to invest millions into replacing this monolith. And it's like, well, you've over-engineered this. You've not really questioned whether you even need to bother, because it's a dying industry. It's probably got 2-3 years left at the most. So, this desire has been kind of penciled in or put onto the roadmap, and you're just persevering with it because you've promised to your shareholders that this is a project you're going to deliver. And it's like, well, I could save you a lot of money. Don't build the bloody thing. So, agile teams are great. I love working in agile fashion, but we need to do more than just work as an isolated team in that way. So yeah, and this is what happens. You have like a product owner who's providing information to you. You've got tickets to work on, and you've got features going out the door, and you might refine those features, and you might refine the logic, and it kind of works well. But what I don't see often enough is questioning, why are we building this? What are we trying to solve with this? And trying to link it back to your business's goals and your users' needs. Another issue I see is many masters. So you've probably all experienced this. You're working on a project, maybe in a sprint, and you've defined what you're going to be working on in a planning session. And there's acceptable forms of unplanned work, right? Defects are unplanned work, and that's fine. But then the CIO has a whim, and he wants to release something, or maybe marketing have spent some budget, and now there's a fixed deadline of when something needs to be out, or legal come in and say, we need to change this copy. There's lots of different people vying for your attention and vying for your time and using up your capacity. So that's another stumbling block for us. something I've seen through working at a sort of more organisational level is teams work as an island often. So you have, you might be part of a wider development team, but your little squad works on a certain maybe value stream, certain parts of the product, and you have one interface with the business, which is your product owner. And they're your single source of truth, depending on where, what development methodology you use. So like if you use Scrum, supposedly that's the only person you should be listening to. So that's your one interface to your business needs. And it puts a lot of onus on them to get it right. And again, this is really common in feature factories where you're just churning out new features all the time. And if you look at my next slide, we're not looking back at what we've done enough. So retrospectives are one of my favourite things. But one mistake I see teams make all the time is they're just looking at the team's processes, and maybe further down the stream looking at pipeline, or maybe looking at dependencies from other teams. But the onus is on that team, and it's optimizing flow. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but I don't see enough people looking back and saying, well, that feature we've just delivered, how's it actually performing? Is anyone using it? Is it enabled on all our clients? If it's behind a feature flag. So again, big mistake that I see. So yeah, there's not a real focus on the customer value, what's being delivered to the customers, what needs you're meeting, and how it connects with business value. So I guess we need to understand business value. So I'm going to look at a few things, landscape and climate, so let's look at those. So your business landscape, I think, is really interesting. Again, you've got a really lovely stock image there on the side, inflatable, what's that called? Lilo, that's the one. So yeah, I was looking at, I've joined a startup, so I say startup, we're like 5 or 6 years old, so when does it stop being a startup? And when does it become a scale-up? I don't know. If you know that, let me know. And we've been through Series B, so we're sort of further along this sort of large-scale expansion. And what you'll see is, traditionally with startups and for-profit companies, they went through this cycle of, okay, they've got a proof of concept, and they go through this phase of, they don't necessarily need to be profitable, but they need to be showing that they're expanding. So there's this real hiring phase, and your team expands massively. So that's what your company's valuing at the time. It's not necessarily delivering more and more value to users or end users. It's about expanding your company. And there's been a shift recently because the world's gone to shit and no one's got any money, that VCs have started to look at companies that, well, VCs and founders actually, they've started to look at their own company and gone, well, actually, maybe it's a good idea to be profitable, before seeking further investment, which kind of sounds sensible to me. And I guess before tech really exploded, that's how businesses operated. So yeah, it's interesting to see that the landscape has a huge effect on that. So if you're in a startup or a scale-up, you might recognise where you are on there. For non-profits, very different. You want to make sure that you're covering your operational costs, but your main goal is to, let's say you're trying to cure malaria somewhere, you want to be expanding by helping more and more people. That's your goal. So very, very different aims. So climate. So climate is factors that affect your business either directly or indirectly. So this could be a competitor releases their own version of your feature. And then obviously that could take users away from you to them, affecting your bottom line. Or it might mean that you suddenly go, well, we need to sort of get our feature out now so that we're not missing this opportunity. You know, it can affect your roadmaps quite dramatically. And then, yeah, there's lots of other things like government policy can change, mini budgets can be released. Again, that can affect your funding, which can affect the rate in which you expand. It might affect what projects you commit to. So all these things have an effect on your business, or at least should. If you're situationally aware, it should affect your business. Again, if we look back at organisations, they're often very slow to respond to anything. So they've committed to a roadmap, and they're going to deliver that roadmap, whether it's a good idea or not. But hey. So, understanding the business and the different characters that are involved. So, if we look at, we have our main business, which is what we all work for. Then you've got your sort of local team that you work within. That might expand to your value stream or your wider software department. And then you've got your customer needs. And these are the three things that I want to focus on generally. And they can be very, very different. So, you know, your business values, which we'll look at in a second, generally around profitability or expansion or something along those lines, something very capitalism based. And then your team values might be around, you know, feeling great at work, delivering something that you're proud of, and being able to do that with as little friction as possible. A lot of friction in getting that word out. And then your customer needs, you know, depending on where you work, that or what you're trying to achieve, very, very different. So business value indicators. What is business value? What does your business value, essentially? So generally, it's going to be revenue generation, satisfied customers, it might be brand building, and risk management. So risk management is what you generally call indirect value. So it's not necessarily adding to your bottom line, but for instance, if you failed an audit, you might get a hefty fine. So it's best to actually take care of your audit trail and make sure that it's in place and decent. And it's a similar thing with like security, like SOC 2, or, you know, avoiding data breaches, because the fines are absolutely massive. It's worth, to the company, it's worth putting the effort in to fix those things. So all these things should link to your company's purpose. Why does your company exist? So these should all be, like, if you look at like OKRs, generally it's a similar framework in that you have core objectives and initiatives that should help fulfill those objectives, right? So in terms of your team, who's on your team, who interacts with your team, these are all values you need to consider, and all these values should influence your company values, as in they should support them, and obviously the other way in terms of customers as well. So, but obviously internally you might have a platform team that you're trying to work with closely to enable better flow. It depends what's important to you, but recognizing who's in your company and why they might be important, I think is really key. And understanding their needs. So there's a really great, I think it's great anyway, exercise you can do, which is called CDE, which stands for Containers, Differences and Exchanges. And the idea is you map out your organization, and you can map out your team even, and you look for, you know, containers. So we've got this work. Our team is a container. We work really, really closely. But then we've got connections with ops because we're using their pipeline. And we've got connections with product because we've got a product owner. And there's loose connections with dev team A and dev team C because we all work in the development team. And then there's finance we have interactions with. And we might have interactions with marketing. You know, the exercise is to uncover where your barriers might occur. So each team has some kind of barrier. And then where your relationships are. So where are your strong relationships? And where are your relationships weak? And do you need to strengthen that relationship? So maybe you need to get a better relationship with your marketing team to understand what their ambitions are. Because if it's not communicated well, you know, you have this sort of, you might end up in a feature factory, basically. Customer support is always a good one to, particularly if you work in testing, form good relationships with your customer support because they know everything that your customers are doing. So a great place to learn. So yeah, so that's CDE. Great way to understand your organization. So all these people in your organization, so be it your team, your business, or your users or customers, they all have these attributes. So there's some level of power or influence. So if your CEO comes to you and says, I want this feature, you're probably going to deliver that feature. And they've all got wants and needs. So wants and needs might be quite different. You know, they might say they want one thing, but actually the way they use your software can be very, very different. So the wants, they'll tell you through behavior. So if you use something like Hotjar, you'll see how your users are interacting with your website if you're web-based. So they'll be telling you all the time how they want to interact with your software. And then your needs is the problem you're trying to connect with. So with customers, it's their needs that you're trying to satisfy, and along the lines, you're supposed to be satisfying your business values as well. So we've done some kind of identification of where we can look for information and help. So on to experimenting. So learning more about what's going down in Groovetown. So understanding your business, I think, is massively important, and trying to understand it as best as you can. I appreciate that. I work in a position where I have a broader understanding of what's going on in the organisation, so I'm quite privileged in that respect, and I have interactions with other heads of department. So some of these things are a little bit easier. Whereas if I'm individual contributor, I might be sort of laser focused on a particular feature set that we're trying to deliver, or a particular project. So what this does in value chain analysis is gives you sort of a zoomed out look at what your company does and what it's trying to deliver. So I put together these Wardley maps, and this stems from working on a project for a well-known DIY company, where we were building features that we were spending. I think some of the consultants were paying something like $1,000 a day per consultant, so a hell of a lot of money, like $100,000 a day, something like that. And I was in a meeting once, and we were talking about a feature that, you know, essentially it was an e-commerce platform, and this feature came as standard in Shopify. And Shopify's plan is $29 a month. But they were spending $100,000 a day to build features that existed on an off-the-shelf solution. So what I love about Wardley Maps and what's helped me with my business is understanding the landscape and climate, and where to focus your effort. So in this example, I've got this new DIY company. We've got this one-coat paint solution, right? And actually is one coat, because that doesn't actually exist. And we've got users which are painters and decorators and DIYers. So our value chain looks like this. We've got, what do our customers need to do? They want to view paint, or they want to buy paint. We need a website to display the colours. We need to be able to take payments. There's some kind of customer relation management, some fulfillment, and then the platform that it all runs on. So we could be very silly and build it all. And lots of companies do that. But if you think about, let's say we're a new company, and actually the biggest thing for us right now is awareness and getting our name out there. We don't want to spend all our money on building a unique platform when really our needs are display paint, sell paint. So if we switch to, okay, well, let's use an off-the-shelf solution, we can save all that money and throw it into marketing and brand awareness and all that fun stuff where your money goes. So who's come across validated learning? Cool. This is a learning opportunity for you all then, I guess. So this coming from the lean startup, and the principle is that you have a hypothesis and generally around a value stream, which again is linked to a business value, and you're trying to design cheap experiments to discover whether it's worth pursuing that particular line of thinking or line of development. So the idea is you come up with an idea, you write some code, and as little code as possible. Like one of the agile principle is maximize the work not done. So this kind of leans into that a little bit. Like you want it to be as cheap as possible and quick as possible to start learning from it. So start gathering data, and then you can look at that data and go, well, actually we've not seen an uptick based on this feature, so let's not bother with the rest of it, or phase 2, or whatever you might call it. Let's park it. Maybe we'll revisit it in 6 months' time if the data's changed, but right now, it's not really worth it. You'll see this a lot with e-commerce companies because they're always trying to maximize conversion. So they're always like moving buttons to different places to see how that affects the conversion rate. So really, really popular in e-commerce. But there's no reason you can't do it in your company. As long as you're tracking things and making sure that you're seeing events happen, you can see where there's drop-off, where there's engagement, and make decisions based on that. What the hell does that say? Yeah, and the advice here is try and move to a theme-based roadmap, which might be beyond the scope of your team, but at least suggesting it and having these conversations, which we'll cover in a second. You might feel a bit uncomfortable because you're suddenly questioning the business and why you're doing things, and trying to sort of, the way I see it is you're trying to pull people up with you. Like I see in development teams that we've got very, very talented people that are very aware of like what good looks like, and kind of suffer from having an outdated organization. So where local optimization can be a bad thing, it can also be a source of, well, we're just going to pull the rest of the org with us. So if we're sat around waiting to deliver stuff, then you need to get your shit together and, level up. So by asking like, not necessarily difficult questions, but very reasonable questions about the value in a feature, again, might be uncomfortable. You might feel that it's a little bit out of your remit, but actually we work in quality. And if quality is value to someone and it's about delivering value, then we should be asking. So yeah, my advice is to look into the data yourself and just start feeding back. Bring it up in retros. If that's the way you want to start, like kick off a little rebellion yourself. If no one else in the business is sort of conscious of these things, be the one that starts it. This is what I ask myself all the time. I call it the Whitney Houston heuristic. How will I know? So whenever I've been investigating a bug, how do I know that's what's happening here? And it's always driven me to dig deeper. And it's something I take into refinement sessions or discovery sessions. I really want to drill into what we're trying to do. what need are we trying to meet, and what's the thinking behind, what's the theory behind, okay, well, if we do this, what measures should we see? What does success look like? Again, very reasonable questions to ask. I don't see asked a lot in teams, so it's something I'm trying to encourage. I was kind of hoping that these would all play, and they will, I guess, now when I click through them. But if you watch this video, it's a very odd video, but I like to think she's looking for value in this video, because yeah, Whitney Houston, fantastic. Great album. So on to some things you can do. I'm probably running over time, so I'll skim through some of this. There's too much to cover in these next few slides, but what I'm going to say is use a story mapping. If you've not tried it, I mean, there's a good chance you've tried it and you've done it wrong, because I've seen that happen a lot. Some people use it as like a brainstorming exercise, but actually that's completely inaccurate. I think it's Jeff Patton, he wrote a book about it. It's at the end of my slide deck. Fantastic book, great for workshops, and really good at drilling into your different user types, linking those to your business goals, and generally looking at flows and how you're going to go about delivering something, but also how to slice it up into valuable chunks. Impact mapping is probably the easiest workshop you'll ever run. You have a goal. You ask who's going to be involved in it, so basically go through all your different teams, your ops, your marketing, whoever, what the impact might be, and what your deliverables are going to be. Really easy to run. You just need some post-it notes or a Miro board or whatever. So check out Impact Mapping. I think it's by Gorko. That's the one. I'm terrible with names. And my advice for your retrospectives. Think twice before you, just abandon that project and move on to the next thing. As I mentioned earlier, companies are very guilty of, we work in projects, at the end of that project we move on to the next thing. And there's not a reflection on, has this even been effective? We've delivered this new feature. Has anyone used it? I discovered recently on a project that this feature had been live for about 6 months, and the usage stats were, there was a little spike from one customer, and then no one else had used it. It's like, well, why is that? It's not turned on for anyone else. It's like, well, glad we spent 6 months building that. So in retrospectives, don't just focus on your local optimization. That's really important, but also look at the stuff you've just been delivering. And I think one of the nice things about that is it gives you a great ownership of, it's not the business that you're working with, it's your business. And you'll feel a greater connection to what you're trying to do. And I think a lot of this actually is about making a connection with your organization. If you like where you work, dig a little bit deeper, form relationships with others, and work together to make something really cool, and not just delivering stuff you've been told to. Not that I'm saying you're sheep or anything, but it's something I've observed. So another thing to be conscious of is value can change. I'll whiz through this. Because of your climate, so what competitors are doing, the landscape, these things might shift over time and might be slow, but they do change, and it's something to be conscious of. So there's a few things you can do to sort of keep an eye on that. Tech Radar from ThoughtWorks, it's a pretty good indicator of what the trends are in the industry, what's being dropped off in terms of platforms, what's being adopted, and things you should try out. Absolutely worth looking at regularly. Plus, it's kind of a nice infograph thing, isn't it? This is a major change that happened. So, 2007, the iPhone came out, changed everything for everyone. Suddenly, mobile first is a thing. Well, not suddenly, but 10 years later, mobile first is a thing. So the landscape changed dramatically, particularly like e-commerce and anything web-based, essentially. My question there was, will augmented reality be the next thing that changes the game? I don't know. Then there's trends in design. I remember this. It felt like a good time. Very clear, all the things are laid out for you.
Do you miss it?
No, because I love a bit of minimalism. So yeah, there's lots of trends you'll see. Again, e-commerce is really good for this because it's so fast moving. Well, not that fast, but. So I've got a word of warning is that, as I mentioned, it might be a bit uncomfortable. You're going to start asking questions of people that you'd expect to know the answers. And in my experience, they don't necessarily know the answers, which can be a little bit underwhelming. And I guess you can take it two ways. I think the way I take it is to go, right, well, let's help them gain a better understanding, present them with the data we've got and what we're seeing through the tech stack, and help them make better decisions. So yeah, it can be a bit disappointing, and it can feel like you're going against the grain a little bit, but I think it's absolutely worth it. And then my book recommendations. So Art of Business Value and Sooner, Safer, Happier, absolutely superb. If you buy one book this year, Sooner, Safer, Happier, absolutely incredible. And then User Story Mapping, a great resource. Summary, understand your business, connect with your organisation and your users to understand what the hell you should be delivering, and then always be questioning, always be asking why. Why are we doing this? What's the intent? What are we trying to prove? Etc. Great way to end the talk, Chris, etc. There we go. Thanks.